Hi, so I'm joined by Lee Ann Kurr, the director and writer of the new horror film Student Body. Lee Ann, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. This is your first feature film. You've done a few shorts before. How was the sort of transition to a feature? Did it bring any new sort of obstacles for you?
That's a great question. Yeah, I had done music videos and smaller short form stuff. And then I actually worked on set for several years as a script supervisor. So, got on set as often as possible because I went to school for theater as opposed to for film. So I kind of treated working as a script supervisor on set in New York as a master's degree without having to pay many, many thousands of dollars. So by the time Student Body was able to get funded and made, I had already spent a good deal of time on set working on features right beside the director. And so it felt just so wonderful and natural to slip in there for my own role as director.
So the film features 5 young students who decide to break into their prestigious high school in order to have a sort of impromptu party, only to fall foul of somebody wearing the school mascot costume who starts stalking around the corridors. I believe the film was filmed in Georgia, is that right?
That's correct.
Did you have any issues with did you actually use a school as your location, or did you have to come up with other locations to suit?
Yeah, it was an interesting process. So we shot in Atlanta for, I believe, a week. And then we went up north to Rabun Gap, Georgia, right along the border of Georgia and North Carolina. So we actually ended up using, so Oglethorpe University is a wonderful school in Atlanta. We ended up using that for the wonderful exterior, and then a couple of key scenes like the lounge, that beautiful lounge, and the exteriors we had in the back. So we used that for a couple key bits, and then we were able to cobble together with 2 other schools, the different hallways. And then when we went up to Rabun Gap in Georgia, that was the majority of the interiors and classrooms. So, and also the soccer game scene was we had beautiful views of the mountains, and we're able to get that kind of, more isolated feeling from being up in the mountains. Yeah.
The reason I asked the question is we've just covered another film also set in a prestigious high school, funny enough, but they actually had a lot of difficulty trying to get locations because a lot of the schools just refused to allow them, because it was a horror film set in a school. They just didn't like the idea. But anyway, you have a very young, very capable cast in this. Were you involved in the casting process, and what was it difficult, sort of like choosing who was actually going to star in the film?
Yes, I was very involved in the casting process. It was a hybrid. We did do some in-person days with our casting director, Russell Boast, who's wonderful, and then also received a couple of first round auditions electronically. And then I actually ended up doing Zoom sessions. This was even before the pandemic. This was in 2019. So I think it's even more common now, but would end up doing Zoom sessions with a couple of actors who were out of town, and just, I like working with them in the room and seeing how do you take direction? What kind of adjustments can you make? What is your, ability to kind of shape a performance based on notes that I give and observations. And so I remember with Monse Hernandez, who plays Jane, that was all online. She had sent in a really incredible first round. And then I did a Zoom session with her and just kind of read with her and just kind of gave little things for her to try. And she was so wonderful. And then for, a couple of other roles that was in person, just seeing how they worked in the room. So it was really a wonderful process. We were so happy to get everyone.
It is a very good cast, and your script allows them quite a lot of space to grow on the audience. We do spend quite a lot of time with them before things start to happen. We get a few nice little hints of what's to come, but mostly, we're just enjoying their company and sort of learning actually, for the most part, they're quite sympathetic characters, so that when they do start meeting their doom, it's it's almost upsetting. It's actually, you kind of, oh damn, which
I'm
is
glad
nice.
it mattered. I'm glad it mattered when
Exactly.
things started to happen. That's the
Absolutely.
goal.
So you've got this great mascot. There's an interesting thing within the film. The school is sort of being sponsored by this company who makes this sort of reinforced, sort of bulletproof glass kind of thing, and they're making a big deal out of that. And then you've got the mascot himself, who's sort of this handyman with a big hat, sort of sledgehammer. Who came up with that idea, the mascot costume?
It was all, the execution was my wonderful costume designer, Lauren Opelt, but on the script that I wrote, it was inspired initially by Purdue Pete. So if any of your listeners are interested in Googling Purdue Pete, he, I don't know if he currently is, but for Purdue University, he was the mascot for the Boilermakers. And he is terrifying. He actually looks very similar to Anvil Al, which we have in our film. And I was just very interested by some of these school mascots that are actually like quite scary looking. And what I loved about Lauren's execution of the mascot was that it felt very like homegrown, like a very kind of wholesome thing that maybe in 1955 someone would be like, yay, like go America, go school, go to state, whatever. And that how that sort of like, kind of, I guess, seemingly benign and wholesome attire can just get turned into something that feels so unnerving and dangerous. And how, schools, kind of with the issue of the teachers at the school being questionable in their behavior towards Jane, how a school should be this safe place. It should be this wholesome place, but how violence and misconduct are things that also occur, and how that mascot can kind of symbolize something that seems initially benign, but is in fact a source of danger.
It's an interesting shot you have at the end of the soccer match where Anvil, is it Anvil Pete? Or
Anvil Al.
Al, sorry.
That's okay.
He just sort of turns and faces Jane, sort of from a distance. And you're right, it's a pretty benign, sort of wholesome thing, but just the way he sort of stands and looks at her, even though it's an expression, one expression thing, you do get that sort of sinister energy coming off it. It is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The film does sort of touch on a couple of interesting and very sort of touchy subjects to do with sort of education. You mentioned the whole thing about sort of inappropriate behavior of teachers towards students, but at the same time you have students sort of exploiting their privilege in order to get what they want, basically. There's an interesting line in the film, which I think Ellis says, where he's sort of saying how these teachers, you never know who they are outside of school, but they can have such an impact on your life that they're basically strangers who have a real significant impact, without sort of realizing himself that the opposite is true as well. But these students are having a huge impact on how the teachers are being perceived as well. It's very, very interesting.
It's true. I mean, the poor gym teacher is constantly drunk, it seems. So perhaps the students have quite an impact on her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is one of the gym teaching is sort of one of those weird professions as well, I think, isn't it? It's like, it's didn't they say it in School of Rock? So those who can do, those who can't become gym teachers or something like that. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So you wrote the script for this. I'm just wondering, as a director, how precious were you towards your own material?
That's a great question. I appreciate that. I think pretty much once we went into, definitely pre-production, you have your whole process with your DP and your designers, your department heads, keys. But definitely once we went into production and I was able to stop writing little, like you make edits and things as things progress. I really made a conscious effort of, okay, writer's hat is off. That person is elsewhere. We have this material. Yeah, we have the material. I'm now directing it, like putting on that other hat and being like, okay, like the film, as you know, perhaps we've heard several times that the film exists in three forms: the written form, the film that's shot, and then finally the final form that's edited. It's three. It's kind of an alchemical process of turning, you know, one metal into another, and it's wrong, I think, as a filmmaker to assume that it needs to be the previous stage, because what was on the page is not what exactly needs to be shot and, you know, molded in production. And then what's all shot might not be exactly what it ends up being pieced together in post-production. So I think, you know, there were definitely some, just treating it as, now we're making this film, and having it be kind of a pseudo conversation between my writer and director self, but having it be a little more discreet in terms of, letting that phase of the storytelling be what it was, and then kind of looking at it in a new way once we got into production.
I'm wondering as well that the relationship between Jane and Merritt, for example. So Jane is very much fixated on a period in her life before her mum died, where they'd gone camping, and so the idea of being out in the woods is something which, you know, comforts her basically. But I was just wondering if there was meant to have been something more to their relationship, because there's a conversation later on they have where Jane's basically telling Merritt her feelings about that camping trip, and Merritt just sort of shuts her down and sort of says, "Stop it! Don't talk about it." And a little bit, it sort of felt like, what will happen in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of thing. And I was just like, you know, was there more to that, or was it just like, you know, she's seeing this as almost like a childhood fixation, and she wanted to sort of snap out of it?
I think that's a great observation. There was a little more in the script about that. I think we ended up for overall pacing and for the flow of the film, it ended up just kind of a couple things leaving behind. And that's also part of that process, is like, what does the audience need to tell for the story to occur? Are there other things that are perhaps more important for the film than this moment existing in a different place? So we did feel that my producers and my editor felt that having that scene be later on, but having hints of it, of her outside and her in this, you know, with her locker being covered with pictures and maps, and, you know, that it's kind of a culmination of those visual clues that we had earlier on. And I think your observation is astute. I think that for Merritt, you know, and I also like the idea of audiences reading in what they will. I like it when the audience can draw conclusions that the film isn't dictating to them to think. But certainly the idea of Jane being like, what about this golden bygone era where we were best friends? And Merritt just being like, stop it. Like, that doesn't exist anymore. Like, like, you need to, basically what she tells Jane several times is grow up. You need to, as she says, grow a uterus. Like, you need to just move on from this childlike innocence that in the end Merritt is actually harboring a lot of anger about, of just like, oh, you get to be this virginal child goddess and I have to deal with the reality of what's been happening. And that being this animosity between them that ends up exploding.
Merritt's an interesting character. Well, all of them are quite interesting characters, especially Merritt and Ellis, for example, because Ellis is the wannabe anarchist character who, can't really sort of see his own privilege to a certain degree. He comes across as a nice guy, but he's spouting a lot of sort of rhetoric and things. But it's like, you got to get your trust funds as soon as you leave school, and you'll forget all about this kind of thing. But and the other one, Merritt herself, she's obsessed with her stepmom and this idea that if she doesn't get into Princeton, she's going to lose her inheritance and things like this. But at the same time, she won't actually do anything. It's like, my privilege must carry me through. But I think that is that sort of like teenage mindset. I think you capture that quite well, of the that sort of naivety, I think, behind it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a naivete behind, as you bring up so well, Ellis's politics, just that youngness of like, well, we should just tear everything down and let everything burn because everything sucks. And it's like, as a young person, you're like, yeah, like that sounds great. And just have him just, I think what I enjoy a lot in other films and what I hope to bring here with many of the characters is I love it when characters are a little bit right and a little bit wrong. And there are some things that Ellis says that it's like, yeah, that is kind of, messed up that these certain things are happening. Then other things where it's like, you don't know anything. You're 16 years old.
You're part of the system, exactly.
Yeah, and Merritt, sometimes where Merritt is dead on. She's absolutely right. And then times where it's just like, oh, and I think that to me is way more human than that character that just always says the thing that's accurate and true. We as humans are a little right and a little wrong throughout our lives.
Yeah, I mean, all your characters have a certain amount of flaw to them. I mean, I suppose the two innocent ones really are French and Nadia. I mean, how difficult is it as a writer when you're sort of doing this? How difficult was it for you to actually kill off the characters?
Oh, well, spoilers. I don't know if there'll be a spoiler alert. Definitely, I think that to me is hopefully what comes across in the film, like what we were discussing earlier, where we're able to really spend time with these kids and able to learn about their vulnerabilities and their relationships and the things that they're trying to hide from their coolness veneer and the things that affect them. So I wanted it to be tough when things happen. I wanted it to feel like it's not just like teens getting murdered. Like it matters when young people are harmed. And it also matters that today young people are harmed in schools. And I just, I wanted it to feel tough and not like, oh, cool. Like that person died in a really cool way. Like, I don't know, it wasn't right for this film.
No, that's right. I mean, there are certain films where you just can't wait.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's great. Cabin in the Woods is a wonderful movie.
But at the same time, I mean, in this particular film, it's not particularly gory. That there is a little bit of sort of corn syrup going around, but what you managed to convey, because of the weapon that's actually being used, all those kills are brutal. They're very quick, but it is a sort of very brutal thing. The only sort of really ironic thing for me was French didn't get to see who killed him. Considering he was sort of obsessed with being the mascot.
I know, poor guy.
I think he'd have enjoyed the irony if he'd realised what was actually happening. But
it was his downfall.